Welcome to the Blue Ocean Solutions podcast, where we feature conversations with innovators and business leaders driving progress in clean tech, construction, and the renewable energy sectors. Today we have our guest, David Krawczyk, the president and CEO of CDK Enterprises. David is a veteran in the industry with 41 years of experience in the residential construction industry. Today, we're going to discuss his deep understanding of what it takes to reduce construction costs so that you can build smarter and save bigger. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you. Looking forward to a discussion here with you this afternoon.
Why don't you give the audience a bit of a background of who you are, what you've done in the past, and your current projects?
Sure. Yeah. Basically, I've been involved in the building material and residential construction industry now for going on 50 years. So I started out on the supply side working in a local lumberyard, and that continued for about the first 18 years of my career. And it culminated with me actually becoming president and CEO of two different companies. One of them was a renovation company centered or located within Southern California called Contractors Warehouse, and the other was a $1.2 billion lumber and building material distributor out of the Midwest called Wix Lumber. Upon exiting that chapter of my career, I opened my own company, CDK Enterprises. And with CDK, what my focus was to form strategic partnerships with companies within the residential construction industry. And basically what that meant is I didn't just go forward with, white paper type consulting. I took on projects with clients that actually included assistance in the execution of various strategies to help them, better position themselves or provide some competitive differentiation with their competition. And probably the classic example of that was my partnership with Chicago's largest home builder back around 2003, in which I shared a equity interest with them and created a component building manufacturing facility that produced floor decks, wall panels, roof trusses. We had our own framing crews, and we manufactured and stood 8 houses a day, which dramatically reduced their cost by approximately $25,000 per home over the course of that period of time. Getting into the, mid-2008 era, when residential construction sort of tanked, I pivoted and started our pursuit of assisting multifamily and hospitality developers with pre-construction and procurement services. And that's where I am.
Okay, great. So you obviously have a great understanding of what it takes to scale businesses within the construction industry.
Yeah, that's true. Both, the Contractors Warehouse, I was one of the founding management individuals there, and we scaled that from a single operation in Ventura, California to, 16 locations doing $400+ million annually. And the strategic partnership with the home builder in Chicago was essentially a startup. So at its peak, we were distributing and providing $50 million worth of framing services to the home building sector.
So with all that wealth of experience and knowledge, boots on the ground kind of stuff over decades, what does CDK now offer to its clientele? Where are you in the services provided today?
What I learned over the early parts of my career leading through the residential home building sector is that most, if not all, residential home builders were totally vertically integrated. They typically had their own architectural team, certainly had their own procurement and pre-construction team, and were general contractors and oversaw the construction of their own projects. With multifamily, I recognized that was not the case, and that multifamily developers relied on third parties, architects, to develop their plans. When it came time to budget and bid out projects, they selected a general contractor to assist them in those processes. What became interesting, the more I learned about that segment, meaning multifamily and hospitality, is that only 1 out of 12 projects, this dates back to about 2010, 2011, actually got built. And the reason for that, primarily, they couldn't achieve the budget to make their financing, work for them. And as I dug more into it, what I discovered, architects are extremely skilled at developing, beautiful projects and aesthetically pleasing, building functional apartment units, etc. But what they really did lack is a comprehensive understanding of the costs associated with the designs that they were providing. So I became very active on behalf of a developer in working with the architects they chose to help identify cost-effective alternatives to some of the assemblies, the things that aren't really directly affecting the tenant experience, right? We weren't changing the look and feel of the project. What we were changing is what you don't see, what's behind the drywall, how various walls, floors, and roof systems are designed. So that was one aspect. And then as far as pricing, what would happen, they'd get through the design process and they'd go out to a general contractor to bid it. And 11 out of 12 times, they'd be shocked by the cost of the project and the economics didn't pencil. So basically, what I developed was a process that said to the developer that once we get through and as we're going through the design process, we will reach out to the market in which you're planning to build this project and test the cost by getting some preliminary bids on key scopes and ultimately bidding out the project before they select a general contractor. And then we use that information to interview general contractors, share with them our knowledge on the cost, and select one that's willing to work with the developer on achieving what we believe to be a reasonable targeted cost for the project. And I'm, pretty proud to say that we've been involved in 58 projects, and all but one of them ultimately got built.
Oh, I think it's fantastic. Your unique positioning to support as like an advisor, but really much more than an advisor because of your wealth of experience. If 11 out of 12 contracts were not coming through, when you start working and bringing your expertise, what did you see with that approval rate? Were contractors willing to move forward with bigger projects because they were more in line with what they felt? The developers were more in line with what the contractors should be bid at? Do you found a higher approval rate in the process?
Well, what happened is initially, I had to establish a clientele, right? A base clientele. And when I found a developer who was willing to look at an alternative approach,
Mm-hmm.
what we were able to illustrate to them is that there are alternative methods. And we introduced those methods to a developer who is willing to listen and then ultimately support those methods in selecting a general contractor who also had to buy into the process. And what was interesting is that many general contractors had been working on a specific project with a developer, maybe for months or a year, rebidding, looking for alternatives, but the economics weren't there. So once we found the right mindset with the two, we were able to assist in bringing the cost of the project down by introducing new methods and practices that they weren't currently utilizing.
That's fantastic. So on average, how much are you able to kind of reduce the costs based on your techniques and services? And then the follow-up question to that, maybe diving a little bit deeper into how are these techniques so much different than what's currently being used in the industry for getting quotes here?
In answer to the first question, projected savings, we've averaged over those 58 projects between 10 and 15%. Typically not less than 10. We've had a couple projects that have actually approached 20%. And the difference really is, again, the mindset and the shift. What we hear initially from a general contractor, what you're doing is what we do, and we don't see a real value in the service. And I take no offense to that. what I think happens is the general contractor is successfully stuck, okay? They've been doing what they've been doing for a period of time. They have a viable business, and they believe their approach is unique and provides the best possible value for the client. What we're able to show them is that although they're correct on the surface, our process seems similar, they're really very different. And they become different from two methods. The first, we introduce them to a set of subcontractors that they normally would not be working with. And what we've done is we've identified subcontractors that are outside the market that we're currently working, that travel very well, that are a little bit more, and sometimes quite a bit more, competitive in price than a local market. Probably one of the best examples I could give is a framing subcontractor. I was working projects up in the upper Northwest, Montana specifically, and framing contractors were looking to be paid $15 to $16 a square foot, which is reasonable for residential custom type construction, but it's what they were used to bidding and what they would continue to bid for multifamily. So what we did when we started working with clients in that market, we had interviewed subcontractors down in the Texas market, framing contractors. Texas is extraordinarily competitive on framing, and those rates were at the time, in the $6 to $8 a square foot range. So they're literally half the price. So we would vet those framing contractors to make sure somebody that we're recommending could perform, offer them, as an example, let's say $10 or $11 a square foot for them to do work in Montana. So two things happened. One, they were able to A, cover the cost of housing associated with going to a different market, and B, still end up making more money on a per square foot basis. The flip side of that is it was a good still $4 to $5 a square foot less than what would be typically paid in that market. So that's one really good example. And there's a half a dozen, I would say, we call them scopes, right? Specific trades that travel very well. The framers, the painters, the drywall subs, in some markets, interior trim, roofing, etc. And those represent a pretty sizable savings in most cases by introducing them to a general contractor who has to get comfortable with saying, hey, I've never worked with this sub. What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is the project may not get built if you're not able to be open-minded and be acceptance of some processes and some subcontractor relations that you're not typically used to. And then the second, and I'll finish this up real quickly, is we also spend time separating material from labor, which is very unusual. Most general contractors want the sub to be responsible for purchasing their own material. And what I learned with those subcontractors purchase material from a local supplier that they've been doing business for years with, and really didn't have a good sense of what the most competitive pricing and source of acquisition of those products were. They're not procurement specialists. And when I started my career, 25 years on the supply and building material distribution side, we understood that very well and saw that as a huge opportunity.
You know, I love hearing your simple but very effective approach. You know, it's like vetting a workforce that can do the job at a better rate, and then finding the same materials or better at a cheaper rate. It seems so logical, but I can see why the mindset is such a big deal because, yes, general contractors, they get into a rhythm of their business. They think this is the way to do it. They get comfortable and they want to keep moving forward, where you and your services come along and start to challenge all of that. So would you say that potentially is one of the challenges or the bottlenecks that you face in implementing your solutions into your clients' arena is really the mindset and the people who will either reject it or accept it off the bat?
It is the single biggest challenge we have. And, you know, I can share several examples. We're just finishing up a project today, when I say today, within the next 30 days, that has been under construction for about 14 months. So it was bid out about a year and a half ago. And the initial cost from the general contractor was about $17 million. I had previously been working with the developer through the design process and had created a budget along the way. My budget is based on known costs, okay, including in that marketplace, because if I'm unsure of a cost during the design process, we'll reach out and talk to local subs or subs that I'm contemplating introducing to the project to make certain that our estimates are in line with their perspective. So we got a GC who came in at 17 million. My budget was 14. We had a $3 million delta on a relatively small project, 2 buildings, 72 units, and there was a sense from the general contractor that there was no way that we would reach that objective. After about 6 weeks working with him, going back through the bidding process, sharing and introducing subs and suppliers, they actually ended up executing a contract with the developer, what's called a GMP, Guaranteed Maximum Price contract, that said they could build that project for $13,950,000. So a hair underneath the 14 million. And as that project's wrapping up right now, what's interesting, there's still a balance yet to be spent in the contingency bucket, which we include in our estimate approximately, and it varies by project, but approximately, 4 to 5% construction contingency. They'll end up with a few $100,000 in it. So in other words, they achieve that. What is most rewarding to me is not only did we come in on the budget with no additional cost for the developer, but what we're seeing is several of the subcontractors that we introduced to this general contractor, they're now contracting with those same subs on other projects unrelated to those that I'm working on. So what that says, they were happy and satisfied with the quality of the subcontractor's work. They could perform. There was a value. They've now shifted their mindset to say, there is a different and better way, potentially better ways for us to go at this.
It's a fantastic case study. It really highlights the effectiveness of your work. I would also imagine for any of our audience that are developers, they love hearing these types of stories of breaking the mold of what the mindset is like, no, this is the way it is. There's no other options, to really coming forward and being able to save, 10, 15, you said even potentially up to 20% on some rare projects is wonderful. Talking about your team then at CDK, how big is the team? What is your business looking like these days? Are you in growth mode? Are you happy with where it's at? And give us a feel of where you're at in the industry.
Sure. Essentially, my team today is made up of 8 individuals, including myself. I've had a larger staff than that in the past. I'm at a point today in which I won't say I'm not in a growth mode, but I'm in a selective growth mode, okay? I'm very happy with the 2 or 3 clients that I'm working with presently. Would be very open to adding additional clients, provided they have the right mindset and are willing to really back the process. Because what I've found in the past, I've taken on some clients that indicate that they are, but they're not willing to be firm enough in their conviction to support the process when it comes time to negotiate with the general contractor. And it becomes a little bit combative, and not with the client, but with the GC. And what I've found is the best possible result is if it's simple. 3 heads are better than 1, right? You put 3 minds onto a problem, and if everybody's working cooperatively, you're going to come up with the best possible solution. And truthfully, we view it as we have no ego. If we're working with a GC and he's got a good solid sub and it's priced competitively, we don't even question it. We don't even try to attempt to replace that because we recognize that's the value. But when we identify areas that are clearly not competitive and there's room to provide additional value, is why I continue to have an ongoing enterprise, right? We could only have repeat clientele, and I've done as many as 12 projects for the same client if we consistently delivered value.
And so your ideal client, is that essentially coming from referrals or people that you've worked with? There's no need to advertise to bring in more people. It's really coming from within your established relationships and experience so far?
That's worked best for us, because what ends up happening, otherwise we've spent time and energy and money, in the past in going out and marketing our services. And, it's interesting. You hear, well, it sounds too good to be true. A general contractor does this. We've never seen, a result like that. And I'll give you an example of today. It's an interesting time in our industry, and costs have escalated quite a bit in the past few years. Everybody's heard the stories about, costs went up during COVID, not all of them returned to levels of pre-COVID levels. And for building multifamily projects, I'm hearing consistently that general contractors feel $225 to $250 per square foot is the current market. The last 3 projects we've bid, including 2 that I just concluded in the last 30 days, one was at $198, the other one's at $201. So we're significantly below that. And when I say concluded, GCs are entering into GMPs, guaranteed maximum price contracts, at that level. So they've been able to be convinced, they've vetted out, our recommendations, and they've embraced them.
That's amazing. Well, it's proof that your system and your support is working. So as you start to then look towards the future, and what are some of the industry trends that you feel will be both positive and negative towards your business, but maybe the entire industry today?
Well, I think probably today, and who knows how long this will last, but there's a lot of concern relative to tariffs. As we know, that's come into play fairly significantly in the last 30 days. Interestingly enough, there are ways to combat things like tariffs. I think keeping a diverse set of options, meaning don't get locked into the same suppliers and subs that you've constantly utilized. That doesn't mean don't be loyal and supportive, but you got to be aware of what's happening out there otherwise. We, interestingly enough, just did a project, and it had some governmental funding associated with it, tax credits, affordable housing, etc. And the requirement was the products all have to be American made. And everybody thought, oh my God, including the developer, this is going to escalate our costs. That project is still coming in at $200 a square foot. So it's a little bit of a misnomer to think that having to purchase American-made products or tariffs on imported products are going to drive costs up. They will if those are your only options. The bottom line is you've got to broaden your perspective and understand there are other options and be willing to reach out and explore those opportunities.
Well, I think you've hit on it a number of times, mindset, right? So here's another example of people thinking it's always going to be this way or not questioning the norm. And then you come along with data and your experience and new techniques in order to find solutions. And you actually realize, hey, the old way of thinking is not actually accurate. So I think you're very uniquely positioned with all of your experience to really keep knocking on those old mindsets and hoping to show people, hey, there's a different way to do this if people are open to that. As you guys move forward, how is AI affecting your business, either in the front end of like collecting data or in the back end of how you deliver kind of a more seamless, easy, efficient process to your clients?
We're just scratching the surface with AI, meaning my company, myself, not necessarily the world, okay? And I see some good opportunities. I'll give you one example that we utilized AI for, and it was pretty eye-opening. And it was a specific project in which there were some addendums, which is a document issued after the plans are done, saying that there will be some changes to what was in the original plans. These were specifically to drywall assemblies, okay? So over the course of about 6 months, believe it or not, on this project, they had 16 to 17 addendums, okay? They kept coming out with design changes. When a design change occurs for the owner, there's a change order because something's changed. Somebody's going to reprice it. And we were working with a drywall subcontractor. And the first set of plans sheet with drywall assemblies was loaded into AI. And then we scanned in the other 16 sheets that came out with each of the subsequent addendums. Some of them may not have had any changes to those specifications. Some may have. AI ran a process and literally in 3 to 5 minutes provided a summary of saying the changes from the original plan to Addendum 1 were X. From Addendum 1 to Addendum 2 were Y, and so on and so forth, all the way through the 16. We still had to put human eyes on what we read afterwards, but a process that took 3 to 5 minutes would have very easily taken a pretty skilled estimator, I'm going to say several, probably days, okay, to get through, go through the detail, a full day anyway, okay? So pretty effective in that manner. The other thing we find that AI has been able to help is there's a lot of alternative sourcing, looking for various information that can help you to lower cost, whatever it might be. If there's a specific challenge that you have, you need some type of coating or paint for a specific issue. You can question AI today, and they'll usually get you at least in the right direction, if not give you a pretty solid response.
Yeah, I think you're accurate in understanding that the best AI really takes human intelligence to be asking the right questions and then interpreting the data. It's not always going to be 100% correct. And that's, you see that on the warning labels when you interact with AI, but can it save you enough time pointing you in the right direction that you can then figure it out there without having to spend the time walking that road to get to that point? And I think your two examples there kind of highlight that. Across the industry then, do you think companies will continue, or how do you feel? Because, you're very experienced here and you have a lot of relationships and colleagues. Do you think AI is it's being quickly adopted into the construction industry? It's being slowly. Where do you see the future of it happening?
I can see it getting introduced in a couple of different ways. I think as you start creating a database and you want to do things like, bid comparisons, pricing comparisons, things of that nature, it can be pretty powerful, right? Because a lot of time is spent vetting those processes. If you can get comfortable enough with, and you hit the key, putting the right emphasis, questions, and data in front of AI, you can get a reasonably, I'm going to call it reasonably accurate and certainly helpful response that saves time and energy. So I see that as an opportunity for sure going forward. Beyond that, I don't know yet how it'll change, what we do today. So much of this industry is still driven by what happens on the job site, right? Ultimately. And it's a big human element that I think would be difficult to replace, but who knows what's ahead and what's around the next corner.
Well, it's very difficult to get AI to run a hammer and a cement driller, right? So at the end of the day, those are still very human things that need guidance. Of course, where could things go with robotics in the next 5 to 10 years? I think where the stage we're at, I think AI is really about optimizing performance of the people who are working, whether it's in an office or on site, rather than replacing them. And I don't think although that's obviously a fear, but I think in the construction industry, because of its heavy manual labor, I think it's a very physical thing that will require optimization, which I think AI can help. David, I've loved having you on the show. I'm really impressed with your unique offering into the industry and how you basically took all of your years of experience, created a brand new consulting service, and really focused on where you can help developers save, 15%, but probably bring forth a much happier experience all through the building process and build long-term trusted relationships. I think you're probably a little bit of a pioneer as you've been moving through changing the mindset as we've discussed through the show. So I really appreciate you being on here and sharing the insights for the audience. Before we leave, I'd love you to tell the audience, how do they get a hold of you if they want to learn more information, if they want to pick your brain, or if they want to potentially be one of your clients? How do they find you?
They can find me one of several ways, obviously. Email. My email is pretty straightforward, dave@cdkinc.com. I'm happy to hand out my phone number at 520-370-6812. And you can learn more if you want to go to our website, which you could also reach out through an inquiry there. And the website is obviously www.cdkinc.com. See.
Great. Thank you, David. And for our audience, if you've enjoyed the show, make sure to like, share, and pass it on to a developer friend that may be interested in learning a different way of doing business. Until next time, this is a wrap up of the Blue Ocean Solutions podcast. And we'll thank you so much, David, for being on the show. And to our audience, we'll see you next time.
Okay, thanks for having me.